Welcome back to the Sweep College Baseball Podcast, Season 4, preseason rankings, and a little bit of predictions going on. Now, we'll start off with rankings. We'll put it up on screen. If you're not on just the audio version, you can check us out on YouTube, see what our rankings look like, or check that out on Twitter, where we've posted that as well. We're not going to run through every single team, but we're going to just highlight some talking points and just big news that's going on with our rankings. Starting off with the number one overall team, Texas A&M. I think this year especially, it seems like there's just a solid number one team. Other years, preseason rankings, it's always hard to tell what teams are going to do, even if talent says one team's the best. But Texas A&M, from a talent standpoint, just seems like they have put themselves by far above every other team that we have here. Other years, it seems like there's maybe like a 1A, 1B scenario where it's kind of hard to tell. But this year, it definitely seems like Texas A&M, from a talent standpoint, is just by far and away number one at this point.
Yeah, I feel like there's usually a couple teams kind of close at the top, but I think in the last couple years we've seen like Tennessee or Wake Forest where they had a good year the year before, and then had a ton of talent come back, and they're kind of ready to take over as that number one team. Seems like the favorite for the year, and yeah, this year it's Texas A&M. There's some other good teams around here, but by far the most talented and definitely the team with the highest expectations right now.
Yeah, there also are a lot of talking points around Texas A&M just because they did lose their head coach to Texas, Jim Schlossnagle, and now they have one of the youngest head coaches in the nation now coming in. He was an assistant previously at Texas A&M, so just got the upgrade there. So hopefully things don't change too much for that team. They barely lost. I don't think they lost anybody in the transfer portal, which is insane after losing your head coach. But seems like everybody is truly bought in to what's going on there at Texas A&M, and they have just a bunch of top players with Jace Laviolette, Gavin Grahovac. And just you can keep the list going on and on with that kind of stuff. But yeah, Texas A&M solidly planted number one, but I don't know. There's just a part of me that thinks it's too good to be true. It's going to be tough for a first-year head coach to be able to bring this team to a national championship, but it really does seem like right now it is natty or bust for A&M.
Yeah, I think that might be the first time ever that the expectation for a first-year head coach is to win the national championship. Not that it's a failure if they don't, but I mean, they are the favorite, and it's kind of an expectation right now, especially since they made the final last year. And yeah, I mean, you combine the fact with they lost Braden Montgomery, who I think he went 12th overall. Might have been a little higher if he didn't get injured in the College World Series there. But you combine losing your coach and losing one of the best players in the country, somehow you're still a favorite the next year. Pretty incredible, and it says a lot to what they're building at that program, especially, like you said, those players not leaving to follow Schlossnagle, who's one of the best coaches in the country, but those players are bought in, and that says a lot.
Yeah, and speaking of that, going over to Texas, we have them ranked 18. I think there's a lot of potential for this team to move up, but it is kind of difficult for a coach to come in the first year really flip the program around. We have seen it before, but they don't really have all their guys in place. Might take a year or two to really bolster, especially with the transfer portal now. It is easier to get players that kind of fit your mold quicker and get that turnaround for guys who already are showing really good results in college baseball. But yeah, obviously not getting any transfers from A&M to go to Texas is big for Texas's success also. So we'll see if Schlossnagle is able to flip that program around as quickly as possible, but easily could see Texas rise up the rankings pretty quickly if he is able to put his mark on the team right away.
Yeah, I mean, with the transfer portal, like you said, it's really easy to rebuild these teams. We'll see how Schlossnagle did with that. Not getting anybody from Texas A&M is tough, but with these big-time programs, it just feels like they don't stay down for long. You see teams maybe suffer for a year. The year before it was Florida State, had a terrible year, missed the playoffs for the first time in forever, and then they come back and they're right in the pinnacle back at Omaha. So it wouldn't be surprising to see Texas pull off something similar, come back up again, be at the top of these ranks again, but it's kind of unknown going into the year. And yeah, it's different when you have a first-year head coach. You kind of have to establish things and it can be a rocky start sometimes.
Yeah, I think people are very easy to forget, like you mentioned, teams that have just had historical success, like Florida State. We saw them have one bad season essentially and just be out of the rankings fully last year for a while, even though they had an extremely hot start to the season. So if you're not looking at SEC schools, which always just populates pretty much the entirety of the top 25, it seems like people in the media are very, very quick to drop historic teams just out of the top 25 and not really consider them after they have, one or two bad seasons. But the preseason rankings always kind of BS. We've been saying this every single year. There's a few teams that aren't in the rankings and just get to the very top, or should be at the top very quickly. Have shown, preseason before conference games start that they have been able to put together really good runs and kind of follow throughout the rest of the season. And we also see some teams at the very top, like last year in TCU, that are nowhere near as good as maybe they should be. We saw also Florida last year, who did turn it around late just because SEC schedule kind of preps you for that postseason if you're able to make it. So don't really want to get on that tangent right now because I have some pretty strong opinions on going under 500 in a conference and still making it into the postseason. But that's for another day. We'll talk about that when maybe that becomes more prevalent in the conversations throughout the weeks. But yeah, we'll see. Definitely some of the top teams that we have in our rankings not be ranked pretty quickly. It's just what happens every year, especially like in the SEC. Some teams that maybe have a ton of talent just aren't clicking, and if you're not clicking in the SEC, you're not going to be winning games against every other team because they also are just stacked with talent.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting season in particular to try and rank preseason. I feel like this previous year was just absolutely loaded with talent, and there was really just a lot of name brand players across the country. We saw the top of the draft was really college heavy, and that's not always the case. A lot of times you'll see a lot of high schoolers in that top 10, but it was a ton of college players this last year. And I'd say there's like 10 plus guys that were household names that went in the first round. And this year, there's really not as many name brand guys that are leading teams. And so maybe not necessarily a lot of intimidation factor, not guys that you're super afraid of playing. Obviously, there's going to be some people that break out and become that as the season goes on. But heading into the year, I don't think there's necessarily a ton of teams or people that you're afraid of. And we'll see how that shakes out.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of teams that are typically a very scary, we have Tennessee at 9, pretty far down what most other rankings have. Just a lot of question marks. They lost pretty much all their big dogs from last year. But we put these rankings together before the big news dropped that they were able to get Alberto Ozuna, who used to be at UNC but left last year to go D2 because he thought he was out of eligibility. That changed all because of Vandy's quarterback Dylan Pavia. So players might be getting more eligibility quickly, and seems like D1 overall might be allowing every athlete to get 5 years of eligibility as a baseline coming up soon. So we'll see if that gets passed. But definitely something of note because Tennessee's lineup was just looking very iffy, and getting a big bat is super important, especially for this Tennessee team where it always seems like they just put up insane home run numbers, and here's a guy that can definitely follow in those tracks.
Yeah, I mean, they really needed that. I think they lost 5 position players to the draft this year, a couple pitchers as well, obviously. So they have a lot to fill in. And I mean, when you're an SEC team, you're going to be talented. You're going to be able to fill those gaps, but it's tough to lose that core identity of your team. Something that kind of changes year to year is what's the identity? Who is this team? And I think it'll take a little bit to figure that out. Tony Vitello's done a great job at Tennessee so far, building that each season, but I wouldn't be surprised to see there be a little bit of a rocky start and maybe a little bit of a slower year than expected for Tennessee.
Yeah, and it's always important to figure out who the next leader up is. They lost a lot of leaders in the locker room this past year, so it's just about who's going to fill that role coming into the season, and that's always a big question mark when you lose just a lot of very, very good players to the draft. But any other notes to make on our rankings? That's kind of it for me, and then we can jump into our predictions.
Yeah, no, nothing else from me. I think it's going to be an interesting year. Like I said, I think there's a lot of parity this year, and not a lot of teams that you're necessarily afraid of outside of Texas A&M. There's just not really those star powered teams that have those headline guys you're afraid of. So it should be a fun season.
Yeah, at least I mean some teams have one or two really good players coming back, but it's just across the board. There's going to be gaps in the lineup at least at the start of the season when there are a lot of question marks, and people will obviously fill in and make their names known, but when there's question marks, they definitely allows you to rank teams a little lower, unlike Texas A&M, which pretty much has a fully stacked lineup. But now, going into our predictions, we'll be keeping track of these throughout the season, but these preseason predictions, we'll go with our biggest surprise, a team maybe at the back end of the top 25 or not ranked at all, who we think might make a big jump this year. For me, that is going to be Stanford. We don't have them ranked this year. I think definitely could have maybe put them in the back end. They're one of the only teams, I think 3 teams in the country that had 3 starting pitchers in the top 50 of D1's rankings. So that just jumped out at me right away. They also have a bunch of players who are now experienced. Last year was like the first year in a very long time that Stanford has been down. And like I mentioned earlier, it just feels like people forgot about Stanford after 1 year because they aren't in the SEC or in one of these crazy conferences. Now in the ACC. So there is definitely that question about travel and how they'll be able to manage that. But I think Stanford, with this starting pitching staff and one of the best college baseball players coming in this year with Rentaro, just a lot of hype around him if he hits the ground running, which I really think he will, because he had a full season of practicing with the team last year. So he's already been integrated fully into the squad. He knows what he's doing. He's had those reps, just not live reps against other teams. But I think Stanford could make a really big jump and surprise some people. But I really don't think it should be a surprise for this team that is perennially pretty much in the College World Series.
Yeah, I think that's another one of those teams that we kind of just talked about, like with Florida State. You have one bad year and people kind of throw you off to the side if you're not an SEC team. And I think that could be the case with Stanford here, where, I mean, we saw this team was in Omaha a couple years in a row, was on top of the Pac-12 for a while there. One bad season, we're all kind of brushing them to the side. But like you said, there's a lot of talent there and certainly a lot of upside. For my biggest surprise, I'm going to go the opposite way, going to go towards the position player group, and I'm going to go with West Virginia. Like we mentioned, there's a lot of teams that lost those star-powered guys, and this is one of them, lost J.J. Weatherholt. He was injured for a good portion of the year last year, though, and the team still played well. I think they're returning 7 of their 9 starters in the position player group, so a lot of experience coming back from that team that made a super regional. Didn't quite get over the hump to Omaha, but I think it's a talented team. Lost a lot of innings on the mound, but had some guys that were injured that are coming back. And if they can get a few guys to click on the mound, I like this team to, maybe not go super far, but, make a super. It's a team outside of the rankings. I think they could be one of the last 16 teams standing. And so, going to go with West Virginia.
Sweet. Now flipping it over to the other side with our biggest letdown, biggest bust of the year, and I'm going back to back. Chose Vanderbilt last year. We're doing it again. We have them ranked. I really don't see them being a ranked team at the end of the year. They're just not scary again. Last year when I saw their preseason lineup, they have a few names, but nothing really jumped off. They're always seems like a pitching heavy team, but even their pitching staff hasn't been as loaded as it previously is. The previous a few years ago, looking back when you have Rocker and Leiter, it just hasn't been the same the past few years, and I think that's going to continue. If you don't have those scary names in the SEC, that put fear in maybe a position player lineup, for like the pitching staff just doesn't really have it for Vandy, and they've never really been a hitting team first. And if that's the case, it's just I feel like other SEC teams will just be able to come in there and be comfortable in that environment.
Yeah, I love just sticking to your word and going back to back there. That's awesome.
Certified Vandy hater out here.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I'm also going to stay in the SEC here. I'm going to go with Tennessee for my biggest letdown. Number 4 team in the country. like we mentioned earlier in the episode, just lost a bunch of talent, lost 5 position players. I think 3 pitchers in the draft as well. Lost Drew Beam. That's a big name to lose there. And so there's a lot of pieces missing. And we've seen the last couple of years, there's been plenty of SEC teams that win the title and have a little bit of a hangover year the next year, especially with Mississippi State, Ole Miss. Those are two that had huge hangovers. And so I'm going to kind of bet on Tennessee to do the same here. Number 4 in the country right now. I feel very confident that they're not making it back to Omaha. And I'll say right here, I don't think they make it out of a regional.
Wow. Bold one. We have Tennessee not looking too hot overall as a state. So should be interesting to see if those predictions pan out there. Now we're gonna go to our Player of the Year and Pitcher of the Year. For me, I don't know. It just felt obvious. We'll take Jace Laviolette here. Last year didn't have crazy stats. He was dealing with a little bit of injuries here and there. So hopefully, if he gets a clean year here, he should be able to put up insane numbers. There are a lot of good players to choose from with Cam Canarella, who was kind of dealing with the same thing, injuries throughout the year, didn't put up insane numbers, but just looking back, Drew Burress is right around the corner. He put up crazy numbers as a freshman, and if he continues on that track, he could easily nab that spot of Golden Spikes Player of the Year.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the segue here. I am going with Drew Burress for my Player of the Year. Just an insane freshman season. I feel like he's, one of these first guys. We're seeing college baseball become more prevalent across the country. Guys are choosing to go to college rather than grinding through the minors immediately. And Drew Burress is one of those guys that got drafted high, decided he wanted to go to college anyway. He's down at Georgia Tech and absolutely killed it last year. If he can avoid the sophomore slump, I think he's going to have another monster season and, could be the best player in the country.
Yeah, definitely. If he's able to avoid that sophomore slump, then it's going to be tough to put up numbers similar to him. But now, heading over to Pitcher of the Year, I'm going to go Jamie Arnold out of Florida State. Had a really, really solid year last year, and if he's able to improve at all, I think he has a very solid chance of locking that down. Just super impressive, and he's looking to be the leader of that Florida State squad, which did lose a decent number of their really good bats. So if he's able to just turn it up a little bit, just getting that win on Friday night is just such a relief and sets you up for a great weekend no matter what. And if you have that ace, it's just takes so much pressure off everybody, pitching staff-wise, and also just the hitters.
Yeah, I was going back and forth between Jamie Arnold and Tyler Bremner here. I'm going to go with Tyler Bremner. He's going to face a little easier competition in the Big West Conference. We will have to take that into consideration, but I think he's just going to absolutely light it up. He's extremely talented, and I think he's going to put up some unreal numbers. Wouldn't be surprised in the Big West to see him have a sub-2 ERA this year. He's just an incredible athlete, probably going to be a top 10 pick this upcoming draft, and so excited to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to put up insane numbers. It's just a matter of how will they, stack up against a player who's playing in a better conference. And if they're somewhat comparable, then it's usually going to go to that guy who's just facing better competition. But before we get to our national champion prediction, we'll go through our 8 for Omaha, the 8 teams that we think at this point have the best chance of making it. And maybe we throw in a few surprises here or there. But I feel like we're going to have at least few similar names at the top, especially because we put together our cumulative rankings. It's easy to just pick a few names off the top of the list there, starting with Texas A&M. Speaks for itself at this point. If they don't make it to Omaha, then it is a real letdown, like we saw Tennessee a few years ago when their team was absolutely stacked. Yeah,
unless there's some, we don't know if they're going to be the number 1 team heading into the postseason, but unless they pull a crazy, 116 or 215 matchup in the Supers, really like this team's chances to make Omaha and contend for the title. And no-brainer right now.
Yeah, next, running down the list, our number 2 team in the rankings. Just going to choose Virginia here also. Really, really solid overall. Might even have, some people are saying they might have a better just offensive lineup than Texas A&M. It's tough competition there. I think there is definitely a gap in the pitching staff. But Virginia is up there, and I think they should be able to run it back and make it to Omaha.
Yeah, it feels like the way that Texas A&M is headlining the SEC going into the year, Virginia's headlining the ACC. Like you said, the offense is absolutely stacked. They do have some arms as well, not quite on the level of A&M, but this is a team that's fairly close to A&M heading into the season, I think. And so, yeah, I think it's also just a no-brainer at this point to put Virginia here.
Yep. And then again, just running to the next spot in our rankings, I'm going to also choose LSU to make it. Some rankings have LSU 2, Virginia 3, or some other teams here or there, but I think LSU is in a very, very good spot to be able to make it back to the College World Series. I think their talent level or overall is comparable to some of these top teams.
Yes, I also have LSU making it here. Yeah, just consistently building on this program and continuing to perform well. I like their chances to make it back here once again.
Sweet. All right, and then the fourth team that I'm going to be putting in is Georgia. I think both of us are pretty high on Georgia. They have an extremely old lineup. I think 7 of their 9 projected starters are seniors coming into this year, and that is just experience you can't look past, especially in the SEC. These guys have done it. They had top end talent last year. Maybe they have less overall talent, but the experience I think just puts you a head above in crazy good conference like the SEC.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have Georgia in here. And yeah, like you said, you lose Charlie Condon, you lose one of the best players in the country, but they do have some talent, a lot of guys returning. And so the experience goes a long way. Like you said, we like those older teams that have just been there. They've gone through the competition, know how to go through a whole season. And Trey Phelps is an absolute stud. Could end up being a top 10 pick. So Georgia could be producing top 10 picks back to back seasons here potentially. I like their chances to go to Omaha as well.
Yeah, and he's the one of the only guys that isn't a senior in the lineup, and he's a draft eligible sophomore. So having that guy to back up with the talent is just in a really good spot for Georgia overall. Now going down the list a little bit, we have Florida State for me making it in. I just think if they're able to lean on Jamie Arnold, they're in a really good spot, and if some of the bats come alive, I think just Florida State is a team that could be tough to deal with in the postseason, especially if they're able to get those wins on Friday or the first game of the series.
Yeah, this is another one of those teams that lost some guys high in the draft. Uh, 2 guys going 15, 16 in the draft, I believe. And so they're going to have to fill a couple gaps. But I feel like last year it was kind of a year early for them. Everyone wasn't expecting them to be back yet, but they got that experience. Maybe have a better lineup this year, and you have Jamie Arnold on the mound. Could be the best pitcher in the country. So, I mean, anytime you have a dominant Friday ace like that, especially a lefty, I really like the chances to go deep into the season. And so, good chance we see him in Omaha.
Yep, and next up for me, I'm going to be choosing Clemson to make it. I just think this year they've just gone through so much heartbreak in the postseason the past few years. I think Cam Canarella is not going to let that happen again, and he's going to push them to make it to Omaha finally.
Yeah, I like. I'm gonna go with a different ACC team here. I do like Clemson. Kind of gonna go a similar story here, but with Wake Forest. Last year was the year everyone was expecting them to be on top of the world, and they fell short. And we've seen a lot of years where that team projected to do super well doesn't end up living up to those expectations, but the next year they bounce back. And I kind of feel like that could be the case for Wake here. There's still a lot of talent on this team. We've seen how well their coaching staff does with player development. And I feel like just going into the year with more modest expectations, at least from the media and the national perspective, could help this team just focus on themselves. And maybe they'll end up in Omaha with, a little bit of a clear mind.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting. I mean, college baseball coaches always say this is the best team they've ever had, but Wake Forest head coach did say that this year that he thinks this team might be more talented than last year, which is saying something because they did have, I think, 3 players drafted in the top 10 this past year. So I don't know if what he's saying is blowing smoke, but it's something at least worth noting that he has that confidence to at least say something like that. But yeah, now next team, number 7, I'm going to go with Oregon here. They really didn't lose anybody in their offensive lineup, at least, and not really many pitchers either. So as a team that just doesn't have many holes offensively, I think they have a chance to do something that they haven't done before, or at least in a very long time before the program came back. I think, yeah, this team is very solid, and there's not really any gaps that you can find.
Yeah, I like that pick. I don't have them in my 8 for Omaha, but I feel like this is a similar team to Georgia, like we mentioned earlier, where it's just a ton of guys returning in the lineup. We like those older teams, and yeah, that experience goes a long way. But for my next team in the 8 for Omaha, I'm going to go with another ACC team. I'm going to go with North Carolina, a team that's bringing back some pretty good bats. And this is another team that lost one of those studs in Vance Honeycutt, but they still have a lot of talent in the lineup. Got one of the best catchers in the country in Luke Stevenson. He's projected to just absolutely boom this year. And then they also have their ace coming back, Jason DeCaro, who was an absolute flamethrower as a freshman this last year. Absolutely lit it up, and coming back with a year of experience. The sophomore slump tends to be more of a thing for position players, I feel like, than pitchers, and so hopefully he's able to continue on the right track and grow.
Yeah, definitely North Carolina was a team that I was thinking about putting in, but I had to stick to my guns here for my last pick, and I'm going to choose my biggest surprise here, Stanford. I think they have the opportunity to shock a lot of people. Wouldn't be surprising to me. But yeah, like I mentioned earlier, 3 starting pitchers that are supposed to be very solid. Their stats weren't amazing last year, but just getting that experience is huge. And putting up a lot of innings, that definitely helps out for confidence and just seeing competition all over the place. But definitely a question about travel for them because of the new conference that they're in. So if they're able to just coast on when they fly over to the East Coast, at least should be able to make a dent. Especially, they'll be used to making huge travels if that does come into play in the postseason.
Yeah, I do feel like the sky's the limit for this Stanford team. For me, I'm going to go with a team that I feel like they're still ranked high, but I feel like it's a similar boat to Wake Forest. I'm going to go with Arkansas, number 5 in the country. So I guess you would say the expectations are high, but it feels like there's not a lot of buzz around Arkansas going into the season. And last year it felt like there was high expectations, but the offense was just pretty abysmal and wasn't really there. One of the worst SEC offensive seasons we've ever seen. I think it might have been the worst. It was pretty awful. But they have a bunch of studs on the mound going into this year, and theoretically the offense can't be worse. So I feel like this should bode well for the season, and I just feel like it's kind of a similar boat to Wake Forest, where you have these really talented teams, talented programs, coaches that have gone there and done it before, and you just don't necessarily have that outside buzz or expectation coming in. I think they may be able to hone in, focus, and get back to Omaha.
We have to put some respect on Arkansas's name. Offensively, they were only like the second worst team last year to Missouri in the SEC. So, they could be worse technically. But, yeah, definitely if they even see like a marginal improvement, their pitching staff is supposed to be elite once again, even though a lot of the names are not the same. They brought in really good transfers. So this Arkansas pitching staff should be able to do similar numbers as they did last year. And if their offense just gets a little bit better, they should be up there. I mean, Arkansas was one of the top teams for pretty much the entire year last year. They just kind of fell off late with a little bit of struggles in the pitching staff, and once that happened, their offense couldn't pick up any slack. So if there's that trade-off a little bit, then yeah, they definitely can make a big run here. But now the big one, predicting the national champion of this year. It's going to be tough to go off of Texas A&M here, but we don't like taking the easy way out sometimes. I think last year I did with Wake Forest as my prediction going into the season, as a lot of other people did. But this year I'm going with Georgia. Just that experience really, really spoke volumes to me. A bunch of seniors, those guys, a lot of senior leadership. I think, like we mentioned before, they have that experience in the SEC. They know what they're doing, and if they get hot, it'll be tough to stop that team.
Yeah, it's tough to choose here. I do like Georgia and that experience. Tough to go away from the preseason favorite in Texas A&M, but like you said, we don't take the easy route. But I'll take the second easiest route here. I'll go with Virginia. I feel like this offense is at a very similar level, and maybe a slightly easier schedule in the ACC than what Texas A&M will face. So I think Virginia could potentially position themselves to be that number one overall seed heading into the postseason. And yeah, I like the makeup of this team. Pretty experienced squad with a lot of big bats.
Yep, definitely. And with that, I think that wraps it up for this episode of the Sweep College Baseball Podcast. Thanks for watching. Any final notes from you, Kevin?
No, that's it. Looking forward to an exciting year.
Yeah, definitely excited to see how things pan out in college baseball this season. We are putting out our top 10 player rankings as well in short form content, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But besides that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace.